Welcome to the program. I'm doing a live broadcast on a few different platforms. So if you're watching right now, you're probably watching the recording. So check the timestamp in the description to see when I actually begin, which will be in about 5 to 7 minutes, I guess. I'm going to let some folks join us live on some other streaming platforms. Angela, good morning. All right, we're going to let some people join us and we'll start here in just a moment. Welcome, Wendy. Welcome, Christine. Welcome, DM. Welcome, Elizabeth. That is awesome to hear, Nigel. Glad to hear you're enjoying the course. Good morning, Lena. Okay. That's awesome, Elizabeth and Kathy. Welcome to whatever this is. I'm just hanging out here on a live broadcast and get to share some reflections, some insight and wisdom with regard to the topic, which is called My Secret, Knowing That I Don't Know. And this is an insight that I constantly find myself coming back to. And as I put my heart and attention into this pointer, I'm always quite fascinated by the depth of truth in this. Most notably, let me start with the profound nature of, let's call it the opposite. And this is found by examining whatever struggle or tension or anxiety or human difficulty that might arise. If I look closely and sincerely, what I recognize is there's so much that I think I know that I don't actually know. And the tension that surrounds my heart or the perceived limitation I'm experiencing within is very much wrapped around an assumption of knowing. And this is fascinating to just look at. I mean, very quickly, you can just look at whatever tension you're experiencing, whatever agitation, whatever emotional disturbance might be there. You can see that there's all of these assumptions of things that you think you know. And it's those assumptions that are giving life to the disturbance. And the fascinating thing here isn't so much that this is like some sort of spiritual exercise or something you should do or should think or should believe. What it comes down to very practically is what's actually true. And I love that question. Right? There are the way things seem. There are the stories I tell. There are my assumptions. And then there is what's actually true. And so it's fascinating to see that the disturbances I might be having are based on something that's not actually true, while I'm assuming that they are true. And my goodness, this goes into an area which has many, many things to explore. But I wonder if we can just take a moment to acknowledge the premise of this. That if my desire is to experience more peace and freedom, can I see that the lack of peace and freedom is intimately intertwined with what I assume to be true, or that I assume to know, that upon a closer investigation, I realize I don't really know. And so there's this battle that's happening. It's like I'm fighting for something to be true that isn't actually true. I'm fighting or proclaiming that I know something when more honestly or more truthfully, I don't really know. And this, of course, speaks to the spiritual invitation, which is to embrace what's true, which is to align yourself with what's true, which is to release the resistance that fights what's true. And very practically, we can just look at it from the perspective of, do you want this impossible fight that tries to make true what isn't true? Or would you rather just allow what is true to be what is true? This is beautiful because it's the essence of conscious evolution. Right? In many ways, we're evolving to see the truth of life more clearly. And in that evolution is the allowing for the truth to be the truth. And the truth that I'm pointing to here is the truth that discerns the difference between what I really know and what I might be only pretending to know. And when I get super honest with myself about that discernment, like if I just get still in this moment and I ask myself, what do I actually know? Not what do I believe, not what do I think, not what do I want, not what do I hope, but what do I actually know? What do I know to be true? And it's funny too, because you can convince yourself that you know things to be true that you don't really know that are true. Most notably, all of these things that we're told by other people that are true, but we don't actually know that. We just assume we know it because somebody else said it was true. And there's unending examples where society or institutions have proclaimed that something was true, only later to find out that we were wrong. And if you can see that pattern, if you can see how much that actually happens, then how much can you trust when somebody else next time says this or that is true? Do you see that? It's like we've been fooled many times. And so that's the important question. What do I actually know? And one of the most immediate things that I find in that question, and this takes a bit of exploration maybe, but what I recognize is everything that I think is past or is true about the past is really my perspective. It might be true that that is my perspective, but it's not true that my perspective is true. My perspective is just one way of looking at something. And same with about the future, right? I might say that it's true that the sun will rise tomorrow, but I can't say that it's true that I'll be alive tomorrow to see that truth. So again, I can't really know. To look at what I think I know about what should or shouldn't happen tomorrow, again, I might not even be alive tomorrow. All of these things that the mind proclaims about what it thinks it knows. And again, it's important to discern the difference between knowing and assuming, believing, thinking. And it's not to suggest believing, thinking, and assuming is wrong, but it is to suggest that there is a very common assumption that what we believe is something that we know. And I love the distinction here because when I can see that there's a difference between what it seems like and what I know, then what it seems becomes much more soft. Like I can acknowledge that I don't really know. I can acknowledge that from my perspective, this is what it seems like, but I don't really know. Do you see how that releases the burden? It's almost like if you assume you know something about tomorrow or the next moment, there's this fear that arises that it might not be that. And so often when you think you know something, you really want it to be that, which sets up a whole host of difficulties because of the fundamental uncertainty in things. So again, in examining this and asking the question, what do I really know? I see that I can't go into the past and I can't go into the future. So in effect, if there is something that I really know, it can only be found right now. And this eliminates a lot of thinking, since a lot of the thinking is swimming around in the past and in the future. And so if my mission, so to speak, is to discover what I actually know to be true, which is also asking, what can I trust in? Then I have to go to right now. This, of course, invites me into a profound presence, which is also the invitation to release what is not present, to release what is not here right now. And I guess it's also wise to note how in our attempt to define what we know, it's fun to look at the impossible comparisons that we make. Such as to say, we can say, well, I know I'm this or that, but isn't that only in comparison to somebody else? And if you change the comparison, are you still this or that? Like we can say, I know that I'm tall. Okay, compared to who? I know that I'm dumb. Okay, well, compared to who? I know that I'm smart. Compared to who? I know that I'm good. Compared to who? Do you see how a lot of these concepts start to fall away when you remove comparison? Because the comparisons are impossible. They don't define what's true, they just define what you're comparing to. And so again, if I'm trying to find truth based on comparison, that's not really truth. If it's one thing 1 second and another thing another second, depending on what you're comparing it to, then that's not an expression of what's true. So again, this investigation into what do I really know, really beautifully, is an invitation to step outside of the mind. Because something I'm always pointing to is the realization that the mind cannot find what's true. The mind cannot see what's true. The mind can only find its own images and its projections. The mind makes declarations based on what it seems to be according to the patterns that it's observing. Which, again, beautifully can be helpful for the human experience. But to me, it still points more to what things seem to be. Because again, you can look at a particular pattern and say, okay, this is true. But so often with that assumption comes a meaning, and we think the meaning is true. And in that pattern, we give names to different things and we assume the names are true. Like, beautifully, we can say that it's true that the ocean does XYZ, as if the ocean is its own thing doing itself, as if it's not life that's doing it. Right? Do you see that? You can say how it's true that the ocean has waves, as if the ocean is not life itself. It's not life waving. But for the purpose of communicating with each other, it's great that we can put names on things. But again, that's just so that we can communicate and play together. It's not really looking at what's actually true. So, in a beautiful simplicity, I can say, yes, it seems like the ocean is waving. It seems that way. It seems like this or that person is doing this or that thing. It seems that way. It seems like I'm lost. It seems like I'm on track. But do I really know that? Because again, when you're lost, you can think you know that you're really lost. But are you really? Do you know that? Or does it just seem that way? Same with being on the right track. It can seem that way. Same as such and such circumstance happens and you can say that this is a curse. Do you know that? Or does it just seem that way based on how you're interpreting it? Do you see the potential liberation here? And this really speaks to a sensitivity in recognizing the weight that comes with thinking you know, right? To define a circumstance as a curse brings an intensity that's only possible because you think you know. And likewise, you can see that when you release the grip of knowing and come back to acknowledging that it just seems that way because that's how you're seeing, there's a dramatic reduction in the burden. It actually leaves space for greater possibility. Like, if it just seems this way, okay, I wonder what else it might seem like if I looked at it differently. And the same could be said for the blessings. How easy is it for something wonderful to happen and you proclaim that you know it's this, that, or the other, and then in a matter of time, it turns into something else. And you experience the subsequent collapse where that has transformed into what you now call a curse. See, I love the softness in this. I love that I don't have to proclaim that it's this or that, or I know it's this or that, because I really don't. Now, granted, it's important to mention that this is really bad news for the ego. Because, of course, this is how the ego survives, based on its false sense of knowing. The ego is constantly trying to protect what it thinks it knows. And if it doesn't know, it's constantly trying to know by making up stories that it knows, all in an effort to protect its imaginary existence. And there's such a futile attempt here. Like, it's trying to do something that's impossible. It's trying to know something that it can't really know. And it always encounters the reality of that, does it not? I've often said throughout the years that as you encounter, let's say, degrees of suffering, underneath that suffering is a statement that says, I thought I knew something. And the suffering is to see that you didn't really. I thought I knew this. I thought it was going to be that. And what I found out is I didn't really know. And you see, I was holding on to what I thought I knew. And then I encountered the painful disappointment that I don't know. And this also arises because we're so afraid of not knowing. We're so afraid of encountering the stark reality of the unknown. I mean, for many people, it's quite a disaster to realize how much you don't know, right? You can see how uncomfortable we might be to see that, especially when our sense of identity is built up so much around all of the things we think we know. And then, of course, again, this is the invitation of spirituality, which is to find a profound peace in the unknown. To not need to know. Because in fact, there's actually a more profound knowing that is the knowing that you don't know. Right? We can say that, oh, I'm so afraid to not know, but actually you can know all the time as long as you're willing to embrace that you know that you don't know. Because knowing that you don't know is to know. As long as you can be honest with yourself about that and not use I don't know as some way to escape the reality of your experience. And sometimes I find myself acknowledging that it seems like I don't know, but I'm open to see that maybe I do. Or it seems like I do know, but I'm open to the possibility that I don't know. So what does all of this point to? What's the opportunity here? Well, for me, the opportunity is to take a deep breath. Can we just relax for a second? Can we make space for the unknown to be the unknown? And can we just be radically honest about this? And I understand that initially it might seem scary. And if it is scary, can you be honest that it's scary? Can you see our tendency to not want to go that deeply into that form of honesty? It's important that it's scary if it's scary, because that fear really points towards what we're clinging to that is ultimately the self-imposed limitation. Because again, remember, if you've signed up for this journey of conscious evolution, let me put it this way. If you're aware that you signed up for this journey, because everyone has signed up for it, if you're aware that you signed up for this journey, then part of that journey is opening yourself up to what's true. And maybe you can see that what I'm pointing to is deeply true. And whenever we encounter new truth, often it's accompanied by a terror. Why? Because that truth destroys our illusion of what's true, which is also to say, it, playfully speaking, destroys what we're holding on to. That's scary. But beautifully, the things we're holding on to that are not true are those self imposed limitations that are not allowing us to connect with what we crave. So, in effect, what you want more sincerely is what you crave. You might think you want the illusions that you're holding on to, but really what you want is the truth. Right? In a way, it's like you can say, I really want more peace and freedom, but yet I can see that I'm holding on to these other things that clearly don't allow me to be with peace and freedom. So there's a part of you that thinks it wants these other things that you're holding on to, but more deeply, you want the peace and freedom. A great example of this is holding on to what other people think about you, which creates a lot of stress, anxiety, and emotional disturbance. You can think that that's really important, but isn't there something within you deep down that says, I wish I could just let go of that? I wish I could just let people think whatever they think since they're not really thinking about me anyway. And the confusion there, of course, especially for the ego, is the assumption that it can make everyone think about you a certain way, right? Like you can control all of the perceptions about you. And once you control all of the perceptions, then you can be at peace. Well, that clearly isn't going to work. And that's part of coming to terms with the truth of things. We exhaust ourselves in that sort of futile quest, trying to control life and others, thinking that it'll work, but we inevitably see that it doesn't work, and we just create a form of hell in the process. And we see the only way out is the path of letting go. It's not the path of trying harder to control everything. And of course, if one isn't ready to see that, then you try harder to control everything so that you can have the direct experience of seeing that it doesn't work, which of course is the invitation to let go. And naturally, again, if you're suffering through that quest of trying to control everything, you think you know something that you don't really know. You think you know that if only you got what you wanted, then you could be at peace. How many times have you played that game and it didn't work out? Right? A fun example I was talking to my girlfriend with was there's this comedy where the mind says, if only she promised to be with me the rest of my life, then I could relax and be at peace. And then one day, maybe she promises to be with me the rest of my life. And that feels good for about 15 minutes until I start wondering, is she being honest? Does she really mean that? All right. So now I need you to say it every 15 minutes. That's not going to work. All right. You see that effort to control in order for me to find peace and freedom. I'm thinking that my peace and freedom is determined by my degree of control of other people, or the degree of control of having them see me a certain way. And clearly that's not working. And it's not working because we're looking for peace and freedom in the world, so to speak, or in other people, rather than seeing where the peace and freedom really is, which is inherently already with you, but it can't be seen because we're grasping for it in 1,000 places where it's not. Hiding behind all the things we think we know. And isn't that fascinating? I think that's such a beautiful form of paradox, where we think that finding security, finding peace and freedom is through acquiring X, Y, and Z, when really it's letting go of X, Y, and Z. We think that it comes by way of knowing this, that, and the other, but really it's letting go of the need to know this, that, and the other. And of course, to let go of those things, comically, is also the release or the letting go of this ego that we have identified with, in seeing that we're not that and getting in touch with what we really are. And it's beautiful to recognize, again, all of this false sense of knowing is wrapped up in the ego. It's the ego trying to survive. And that's such a beautiful exploration to dive into that. And again, as everyone's watching, you are all on different phases of the journey. And so I don't know to what degree you've actually seen that or not. So, spoiler alert, maybe. There's also this comedy amidst it all, which is an invitation to not take this so seriously, which again is an invitation to question the assumption that thinks it's serious. Which is interesting too, because if you can go beyond that assumption that knows it's serious, the only other option is to lean toward a playfulness, right? If you remove seriousness, there's a natural playfulness. And so I'm not suggesting that you should pretend that it's playful. I'm suggesting you question the assumption that it's serious. Do you really know that? This is beautiful because it invites us back to the middle. Maybe just referred to as the middle way. And for me, anyway, maybe you see it as well, but to see that it's not serious releases so much tension and anxiety that the only other option is to have this humble space of playfulness emerge. And I'm not talking about an exaggerated playfulness where we're trying to make it playful, but just more so a lightheartedness about it all. So that's the inquiry. That's the invitation. What are you going to do with that? I don't know. I'm just sharing what I see from behind my eyes and within my heart. Maybe you find some value there. But other than that, I can still hang out here for a little bit and answer your questions for those watching live. If you have questions. then now would be the time to write them in the chat box. Or if there's something else that you would like me to speak on, we could do that. And then if not, we'll just hang out here. Maybe we'll do a guided meditation. Yes, Angela. Lightheartedness is difficult to reach when I'm trying so hard. Yeah, let me add to that and say that lightheartedness is difficult when I take trying hard seriously. And I say it that way because there is definitely a time and place for trying hard. And I just wrote about that this morning, where it's important that we embrace the reality of doing hard things. Because let's not get it twisted in a world of only rainbows and butterflies and acknowledge the reality of growth. That for us to grow on this journey, we not only have to encounter what is fearful, we also encounter what is difficult. And in the same way that if you avoid what is fearful, you do not grow. And if you avoid what is difficult, you do not become stronger. And I love this as well because it questions the assumption that thinks, I know this should be easy. I don't really know that. Now, granted, it's definitely true that it's possible to make things that are hard way harder than they need to be. But I think it's wise to acknowledge the very real and practical opportunity of growing through doing that which is difficult. And the example I used this morning in my writing was that of taking cold showers. And this morning was just a brilliant example of I was playfully angry about getting in the cold shower. Like, I really did not want to do it. And since I moved out to the island of Crete in Greece, the cold shower is much colder than it was in Portugal. And I just really did not want to get in the cold shower. And there's this recognition that because I don't want to do it is exactly why I'm going to do it. Not only do I always find gratitude after I do, but I like the play of showing myself that I can do difficult things. Like, even if I don't want to do it, and yes, there's benefits that I feel afterwards, but even though I don't want to do it, that's not a valid excuse for not doing it. And that speaks to so much in life. Kind of like with being honest, right? There can be the same degree of difficulty. Oh, I really don't want to tell this person XYZ. But there's the benefit, numerous benefits after that come with living a life of being honest. Right? Like, if you recognized how free you are, then you would just be honest, because that's actually the easier thing to do. right? A life lived telling a bunch of lies creates a disaster. It completely disconnects you from the authenticity of your humanness. And so pushing through the difficulty of such things, in a way, is a form of radical self-acceptance. It's a form of radical self-care. Another way I like to see it is that it shows my mind that my mind is not in charge. Because it's the mind that doesn't want to do these things. It's the fear that doesn't want to do these things. But all of that is protecting something that doesn't need to be protected. In a way, it's protecting my conditioned bubble of comfort, which doesn't serve me very much. And so there's the invitation to engage difficult things with a lightheartedness. You can even find a lightheartedness in your anger that doesn't want to do the difficult things. Like, it can be funny. And I know, just from my own experience, that there's a very real trap, especially in spirituality, to assume that it should be easy. And so we avoid doing difficult things while we just tell ourselves comforting spiritual stories, but we don't ever actually engage the raw reality of our human journey. There's so much opportunity for growth and expansion, but it is always going to come by way of doing something that is perceivably difficult. This is just innate in the process. It's part of the journey. What else would you like to explore or talk about? Oh, I love that, Brian. I notice even the things that used to comfort me now create difficult feelings. Now I am more aware. Yeah, that's beautiful, brother. Thank you. It's so true, and I so resonate with that. And to see that and to be reminded of that, it asks me to look a little bit more deeply of where that might be happening now. Like, where am I using comfort in a way that is preparing me for disappointment? Where am I using the avoidance of difficult things for present moment comfort that don't ultimately serve my journey? And you see, that's not necessarily a fun question, because it invites you to get radically honest with yourself, and it invites you into difficulty, right? Like, if we're doing things to stay in a form of comfort, we're doing that to avoid something that's difficult. So why would I ask questions that point me towards doing something difficult? You see the radical nature of that self-honesty? That is a heartfelt question that is more interested in what's true than it is about staying comfortable. And it's those types of questions, I guess in a worldly way, we can say it's those types of questions that make the difference between success and failure, between those who grow and those who don't. In fact, it's very obvious to see that those who don't grow have a pretty consistent tendency to blame and seek comfort. And again, not as a judgment, not as a right or wrong, but just as a way of things. And I see that so loudly in my own experience. It's like I can almost say that throughout my life, I've been a master of finding comfort and to suffer the consequences of that. Ren asks, why do I feel like I'm protecting my heart by avoiding leaving my comfort zone? I love that. I so resonate with that. Oh my gosh, and it's beautifully tricky too, which just tells me to start with a compassion for it all. Like, let's just take a deep breath first and acknowledge that maybe we don't know. Acknowledge that we are cutting ourselves short in some way. Acknowledge that maybe we're confused. But let's look at this a little bit. The question of why do I feel like I'm protecting my heart by avoiding leaving my comfort zone? And the illustration that comes up for me right now is in the example of, let's say, a creative person who wants to create but doesn't share their creation to avoid potential rejection. And the narrative on the inside says, if you don't share your creation, then you won't get rejected, which means you protect your heart. And this is a beautiful story of the ego. The ego is trying to protect itself, which we confuse as yourself. And for the ego to survive and be protected, it has to stay in the comfort zone. It has to avoid potential failure. It has to avoid the appearance of being rejected. But all of these things are misunderstandings about what's true, such as the nature of rejection. Like when somebody doesn't like your painting, that doesn't actually have anything to do with you. To take it personally is simply the ego trying to use the experience to validate its existence. So when somebody likes it, they feel all self-important. When someone doesn't like it, they feel defeated. And it doesn't like that defeated feeling, so it's not going to share unless it can guarantee a particular outcome, which is a very restricted way of living and doesn't really allow you to fully express yourself. So it feels like we are protecting the heart by avoiding leaving the comfort zone because it helps us avoid the things we fear. And we interpret that as protecting ourselves, which again, compassionately is understandable based on the assumption, right? Based on what you might think is true, then it makes sense that it's more safe to stay in your comfort zone. But what I'm suggesting is the assumption of what we think is true isn't actually true. And behind that, what we'll call a desire to protect your heart is really an aching or a longing to be more free, where maybe you secretly wish you could leave your comfort zone, right? It's like the person who stays in the house all day because they're afraid to go outside, but really they wish they could go outside. But to them, based on their assumptions and their, psychological wiring, they assume that it's not safe to go outside. And so they can wrap themselves up in a narrative that says, I'm just taking care of myself. Do you see that? And as sweet as that might be, it's delusional. But again, there's compassion for it. And maybe that's appropriate as one, perceivably protects their heart and avoids life, avoids opportunities to connect with others. And as they sit in that isolation, then the pain will show itself that, no, this isn't actually what I want. And if I'm going to connect with what I want, then I'm going to have to go outside. Thanks for that, Ren. Nikki says, I used to be so patient and feel I have strayed from that, allowing negative energy of an environment. Let me start over. Nikki says, I used to be so patient and feel I have strayed from that, allowing negative energy of an environment to affect my lightheartedness and trying to get back to my authentic self. Well, there's not a question in there, Nikki. I think you're just sharing something, which I'm having a little difficulty understanding. Anna asks, how do we strike the balance between doing hard things for growth and not just seeking discomfort out of trauma and to punish ourselves? How to tell them apart? That is a beautiful question. Thank you. What this question points to for me is the energy that we're bringing to the experience. And it's a sensitivity that one has to tune into for themselves. Like only you can find this out. And it really hinges on a depth of self-honesty. Even if that self-honesty says, I don't really know, that's a good place to start. And if that is the self-honesty that I don't really know what the difference is, then the invitation is to continue doing what you're doing with a willingness to discover the honesty. Like, why am I really doing this? And you can make adjustments accordingly. And there isn't really a solid right or wrong answer to find. The invitation is to just engage with a deeper willingness to see more of what's true. And that will become apparent over time. What you don't want to do, and I say this lightly, speaking to myself, what you don't want to do is not engage until you have it figured out. Because so often what I think I know something is again just what I think I know, and I don't really know that. And there can be so much delay, so much waiting around until you figure it out before you do something, and your whole life could pass you by. And so the opportunity is to engage from where you are and then see what happens. Engage and learn. Don't necessarily learn and then engage, because you can't learn without engaging. And also what helps me to discern the difference is just a question of importance. Like, who is this important for? Is this important to satisfy my illusionary sense of self-importance? Right? So that I can be liked, so that I can be worshiped, so that I can whatever? Or is this about honoring what's true? Is this about honoring what's sincere? And this, of course, is also something that you work out in the process, right? Because it's totally appropriate that if one's sincerity says, I'm doing this hard thing so I can one day be famous, if that's the sincerity right now, then wonderful. Because that sincerity will take you down a path so you can see the greater illusion in that. But you can't see the greater illusion in that unless you have the direct experience of exploring it. This is why I'm often pointing towards the embrace of what is sincere rather than embracing the concept about what you think is the right or wrong thing. Because trying to embrace the concept about what you think is the right or wrong thing will ignore your own human authenticity, will ignore what is sincere for you. So if somebody has what appears to be a genuine sincerity to be the most important person in the world, which, is an impossible quest, then wonderful, explore that sincerity. That sincerity isn't null and void. It's relevant because it's sincere, right? There's something within you that sincerely is curious about what is that. That's part of your human adventure, to explore that path. But you see how easily we can get lost in these spiritual concepts about what you should be doing or shouldn't be doing, and it just ignores the authenticity of your human journey. Maybe it's wise to say that it's not me that figures out what the balance is. Rather, the balance will reveal itself as I engage in the journey, which I think is very wise. Again, from personal experience with spending so much time trying to figure it out before I engage, only to realize later on that I learned through the engagement. And to answer Nicole's question about how do you begin this exploration, you begin with getting in touch with what's true. Which is to get in touch with what's true inside of you, which is also to say to get in touch with what's actually sincere, which is also to say having a deeply honest conversation with yourself, which might be what's the word? Overwhelming, because you might stumble upon a lot of insincerity. But as it relates to where to start, you just pick one area. And if you need to start with something small, then start with something small. As a practical example, it's also like asking, where am I not being honest? Right? And you can find 1,000 areas where you might not be being honest. Okay, we'll just start with one. Right? Don't get overwhelmed by the 1,000 areas. Just start with one that seems manageable. Start with something that's easy. Marie asks, how do we be okay with being seen and feeling safe with it if we had to show ourselves for our business, e.g., delivering workshops online, doing extra TV work? How do we be okay with being seen? Well, firstly, if there's something that's not okay with being seen, can we get in touch with a profound honesty about that? Like self-honesty, that's where it all begins. And what I like to do is I like to get in touch with the pain of that honesty, where if I'm not okay with being seen, which means I'm afraid of being seen, I like to examine the depth to which that is limiting my human experience. Right? Like, what am I sacrificing in my life because of that fear? And ultimately, what I find out is it's like I'm not allowing myself to breathe. I'm not allowing myself to be me. Right? I'm literally denying my own existence because of this fear of being seen. And so I'm completely allowed to avoid being seen. I'm completely allowed to be afraid of being seen. But is that serving me? And is that really what I want? Also, inviting the, let's say, visualization of what my experience might be like if I released a little bit of that fear. Like if I made this a priority, if I made this a focus, like a focus for this year, of taking small, meaningful steps to move through that fear, doing difficult things, what might that journey look like? Right? You see, now I'm in a position to playfully craft a path that leads me out of that delusion, if it's important. And the beautiful thing about this is, as with all fears, we are fearing something that's not really true. So all of the fears that we have about being seen, they're effectively not based in reality. Case in point, I'm afraid that if somebody sees my artwork and they don't like it, then it means I'm not enough. So I'm afraid of being seen because I don't want other people to see that I'm not enough. And the delusion there is to assume that somebody else not liking your artwork means anything about you at all. Right? And the more you see through that illusion, the more easier it is for the play of being seen. And likewise, as it relates to being seen, you're not allowing yourself to be seen by others per se, which is often the confusion. More accurately, you're allowing yourself to see yourself. There's this fundamental craving in the human experience that says, I want to see what I am, which is often translated as, I want to be seen. But in the statement, I want to be seen, the question is, who are you talking to? You're talking to yourself. I want to see what I am, right? That's why you're here on this great human adventure. I want to see what I am. Now, what most people do is they misinterpret that and they think, I want to be seen by others. But really, it's, I want to see what I am. And if you think it's, I want to be seen by others, then you're constantly concerned about what other people are seeing, which is almost irrelevant because you can't really see what other people are seeing. It sets up a world of constant thinking, making up scenarios about what you think other people are thinking when other people aren't really seeing you, right? Case in point, I use this example a lot, like in the work that I do, like doing this live video right now. I'm not doing this because I want to be seen by others. This is an opportunity for me to see what I am, right? Like this is my artwork, so to speak. I'm here looking within what I am and letting it out so that I can see it. It's almost like a container that I've created that allows me to just breathe more freely. It allows me to express myself. My work is my own spiritual practice. It's the doorway that allows me to see me. Same with relationships. And this is great because this just happened today. Like, I went to see my girlfriend this morning, who this house that I have is actually two houses in one, and she lives in the upstairs part. And I went to go see her this morning, and I was like, I love that I get to experience my love in loving you. Right? It's like, you don't have to do anything. I just love that I get to love you so that I can experience this love that is within me. Like in being sweet, I love that I get to experience the sweetness that is within me. And so I love you for that. I love that you are just you, and I'm able to see myself by loving you. Right? So it's like, I'm not loving her so that she loves me. I'm not loving her so she sees me a certain way. I'm not being sweet to her so that she has thoughts about me. I'm doing those things for the sake of my own sanity. Because it's a beautiful experience for me. And in a beautiful way, cosmically, it sets up a stage that helps her see herself more clearly for her to do the same thing. It's like we're both serving as mirrors that allow us to see ourselves more clearly. And so the same with this reflection and hanging out with you right now. Like, I'm not so much doing this for you. I'm doing this for me. Right? This is the greatest gift that I can give myself. And it's amazing to see how my life has been set up this way, doing the work that I do, where over many years, I've set up this container that allows me to see myself, that allows me to express myself, that allows me to share what I love. And it's so interesting to see the journey before that, where I was doing things that were essentially what other people wanted me to do so that I could get them to see me a certain way, right? Or I could get them to pay me, thinking that that's the way it had to be, which was a very limited way to view the human experience. And that was just painful. I didn't even realize that it was possible to share my love and get paid for it. Which is also like sharing my love for the sake of my own sanity and then being loved in return, like in a relationship. So that's what I have to say on being okay with being seen. Nikki asks, how can I not allow general rudeness to have an effect on my personality? I used to have patience and now I'm reaching out of character. How can I get that patience back? How can I not allow general rudeness have an effect on my personality? And you say, I used to have patience and now I'm reacting out of character. Okay, so what changed? Right? If you used to have patience and now you don't, what changed? What are you taking more seriously now that you didn't take in the past? Or we can ask, what is arising for you that you desperately want to avoid? She says, rudeness is constant where I live, and it wasn't this bad in the past, I assume. You know, I find these things quite fascinating. And just a big old disclaimer once again, I'm just talking to myself. I'm just sharing my perspective. I'm I'm assuming my experience in your experience and sharing what I would see. And so it's not a declaration of how you should see. I'm just sharing for the playful sake of sharing. But these concepts, such as rudeness, I find fascinating because there's the assumption that when people are being rude, they're being rude to you. And this sets up a world of difficulty when we take things personally. And I just invite an exploration of this in a very self-compassionate, non-judgmental sort of way, where if you encounter somebody that appears to be rude, do you see how it becomes even more rude when you take it personally? And can you see how if you didn't take it personally at all, their rudeness probably wouldn't even register as rudeness? Meaning, if I encounter somebody who is clearly going through a difficult time and not being nice to themselves, I can see how that would result in the expression of what we call rudeness. But them not being nice to themselves and them having a difficult time and what comes out of their mouth doesn't mean it's about me. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that the way people treat other people is a reflection that shows me how they treat themselves. So if I encounter somebody who is in appearance rude to me, they're essentially showing me that they are rude to themselves. Now the question is okay, what do you do after that awareness? For me, there's a compassion that emerges. Because there's a very obvious confusion where they feel distant from love. They feel unworthy. They feel painfully inadequate. They're scared. And they don't know what to do with that. And so it's like spilling out on the surface. And this just dramatically changes my interaction with that person. One, it transforms from a defensiveness to a curiosity. Now, I'm not making any declarations of how one should respond, but what I am suggesting is an awareness in the different ways we can see these things and how we make it way more difficult than it actually is based on our determination to take things personally. Because in one regard, they can be showing me how poorly they treat themselves, and I feel moved to hold a space and let them be verbally abusive because I compassionately understand the pain they're going through. So I can just hold a space and just let them get that out. And on the other hand, there could be a scenario where I'm just not in a space to do that. And so it's like, okay, well, if this is what's happening right now, if this is where you are, I'm just not going to participate. But I'm sorry that you're hurting, and I'm sorry this is difficult for you, but I'm going to go somewhere else. Or I'm just going to communicate my non-interest in the dynamic if I'm unable to leave that situation somehow. And this also speaks to a depth of self-honesty that allows yourself to be honest in such a way. Now, again, a lot of times people don't allow themselves to be honest because they're afraid of being rejected. They're afraid of what the other person might think. They're afraid that they might leave you. You know, there's 1,000 examples, but it does come back to this pathway of radical self-honesty and honoring what is sincere and true within you. And yes, granted, there's lots of different variables and dynamics that would make different responses more appropriate than others. But again, at the foundation, it comes back to at least allowing yourself to be honest with yourself about what's really going on, with both regard to how you really feel about it and to what and to what regard are you taking things personally, where maybe you don't need to be. So in response to that, the question of how can I not allow rudeness to have an effect on me? I wouldn't start there. I would again come back to the question of what's really true, because maybe the effect it's having on you is the doorway for you to see more clearly. Because as I've said 1,000 times over, our emotional disturbance is in response to not seeing things clearly. So if I'm emotionally disturbed, which is the result of, for example, taking something personally, then my disturbance is the result of me not seeing something clearly. So being disturbed is an alarm that invites me to question what I think I'm seeing. It invites me to question my assumptions. It invites me to question what I think I know. You see, that's a teacher. So the question isn't, how do I get rid of the teacher? Maybe the question is, how can I hear what the teacher is saying? And this can be difficult as well, too, if we're holding on to past versions of ourselves, right? Like, oh, I used to not be disturbed so much. And so I want to get back to that. Well, maybe you're going through a new degree of growth, right? Maybe you're expanding. So maybe it's necessary that you're going through this right now. That's perfectly valid. So maybe we can just take a breath and be open to the possibility that this is the lesson right now. This is what it's supposed to be. And it also invites a profound humility, right? Like if we're struggling with something, we can say, oh, help me hide from this struggle because it makes me look bad. Or maybe I can just be honest and be like, wow, I'm really struggling with this. There's something I'm not seeing. Right? Like as I talked about in the beginning, it's an invitation to investigate what we think we know to see that we don't really know. And as I also mentioned, to investigate how these disturbances are a result of thinking we know something that we don't really know. So that might be a wise question to ask in the disturbance. What do I think I know that I either don't really know or actually isn't true at all? And most often that's going to relate to taking something personally where we think we know that this person is being unkind to me. This person is being rude to me. Maybe it's not about you at all. Which is actually quite interesting because that's almost a harsh reality to see where our human being is taking other people's experiences and making it about ourselves. Right? Could you imagine? Other people are struggling and we're making it about me when it's not about you at all. And this is something the ego loves to do. The ego loves to make everything about itself, right? Like it has plans on Tuesday and it starts raining. And so the ego says, God hates me. It's like, well, maybe it's not about you. Right? Maybe this is about life being life and it's not God out to get you. Maybe it's just not about you at all. All right, lovelies. Wow, that was an hour and a half. That was a good time. Let's see. I've recently uploaded a 30-day course on Insight Timer. Some of you on here are currently taking that course and you're raving about it. That's awesome. 30 days of conscious living. It's 15-minute audio lessons every day for 30 days. Granted, you could just go through them all, but I really recommend doing one per day and then letting that set the tone for your inquiry for the day. Because the way that I've structured these are really to build on each other as you've taken the time to let each one sort of marinate in your system. Also, if you are taking that course and you are enjoying it thoroughly and you haven't left a review yet, would you please do me the favor and leave a review? Unless your review is less than 5 stars, then finish the course first and let it get to a 5-star review and then leave a review. But that would be helpful. I've also uploaded a bunch of premium audio recordings, which I hadn't done. I'm just starting to do that because I got the payment statement and apparently Insight Timer pays me way more money when I add courses and premium content, which you of course would have to subscribe to Insight Timer to access that content. But they pay a lot more for us teachers who upload that content. So I am on my Insight Timer profile, there's an enormous amount of free content on there, but I think from now on, everything that we add is most likely going to be added to the premium section. And you can't really complain about that unless you've listened to all of my free stuff. Let's see what else. I imagine that I'll be back next Tuesday, approximately around the same time. Other than that, it's an absolute joy to hang out with you. Thanks for your donations. If you have done that, I appreciate it. And I will keep doing what I'm doing. All right, lovelies. Until next time, aloha and cheers to the beauty that you already are. Tell your friends. I forgot to say that. If you enjoy this stuff, actually, I'm going to really specifically ask for your help because I'm trying to make a decision of where I'm putting my time and attention as it relates to sharing content. And I'm very close to choosing Insight Timer as a main source of my intention. So I'm asking for your help in growing my reach on Insight Timer. Meaning that if you enjoy my content, if you enjoy these live videos, please share it with other people that you feel would receive tremendous value and benefit. Because as that audience grows, then it tells me from a business sense of where to put my attention. And so in the spirit of that, as it grows, I can keep coming back here and loving on you in this form. And I'm perfectly fine doing that. But I'm also running a business, so I've got to be somewhat intelligent about where I put my time. All right, you guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.